I sincerely love the American auto industry. It is impressive at almost every stage of its history. From the shining chrome of land yachts and incredible muscle cars tearing up the asphalt, to the almost helpless attempts by Cadillac to use neo-retro styling to compete for younger buyers against BMW and Mercedes on the North American market. The history of the American auto industry is so vast and eventful that it naturally includes many failures. And often these failures turn out to be no less, and sometimes even more interesting, than the success stories. A good example is the story of the Geo brand, which was created by General Motors to compete with the growing presence of Japanese cars on the North American market. What makes it interesting is that a solid idea in theory turned into a clear example of how GM burned through billions and ended up with losses. In the 1960s, the United States saw a truly massive wave of European and Japanese car imports. They moved in almost without resistance, filling gaps in the North American market. Sales grew quickly and soon reached levels that Detroit could no longer ignore. GM, not used to playing catch-up, especially on its home turf, couldn't accept that situation. From that point on, the company tried to establish itself in the compact car segment. Though compact by American standards. For example, the compact Chevrolet Corvair had a body length of 4,572 millimeters, or 180 inches. That was comparable to cars like the Opel Rekord or Ford Taunus, which in Europe were considered full mid-size vehicles. At the same time, the Corvair was expected to compete not only with domestic rivals like the Ford Falcon and Plymouth Valiant, but also to slow the spread of the German Beetle, which was rapidly gaining ground across the United States. In key markets like California, it was already leading sales. Of course, the Corvair was not a direct competitor to the Beetle in almost any sense. Its role was different, to offer Americans an alternative to imports and keep buyers within the brand. And at first, it worked. In 1960, about 250,000 Corvair were sold. In 1961, sales grew to 330,000, which became the peak. In the following years, sales declined, but still remained in the hundreds of thousands. Everything changed in 1965, when American lawyer and activist Ralph Nader released his book, Unsafe at Any Speed. It was a harsh critique of the American auto industry, and the Chevrolet Corvair became the central example, and in many ways, the main anti-hero of the book. The title itself was built around it. Because of its rear-engine layout and incorrect suspension tuning, the Corvair had a higher rate of accidents, which severely damaged its reputation. In the end, the Chevrolet Corvair was discontinued in 1969, never managing to shake off the label of one of the most dangerous American cars of its time. Meanwhile, Beetle sales continued to grow through the late 60s, reaching an almost absurd 570,000 units by 1970. At the same time, Japanese compact cars were also gaining momentum in the United States. Their sales were not yet as high, but the trend was clear. It seems that, realizing a direct fight with the Beetle was pointless, GM chose to focus on Japanese imports instead. So in 1971, the Chevrolet Vega was introduced. Unlike the Corvair, it had a front-engine layout, and by American standards was truly compact. Its body length was 4,318 millimeters, or about 170 inches, only about 100 millimeters, roughly 4 inches, longer than a two-door Opel Ascona of the same period. The Vega had a strong start. In its first year, 277,000 cars were sold, and in 1972, sales reached 390,000. But things went downhill fairly quickly. Reliability and build quality issues turned out to be completely unacceptable. The aluminum engine block without cast iron liners, constant overheating, and frequent failures quickly erased all of the car's advantages. Moreover, despite its solid sales figures, many automotive historians consider the Vega one of the worst cars of all time, though that is certainly open to debate. In any case, GM once again failed to establish itself in the compact segment, while Japanese and European imports continued to strengthen their position. Then came the Chevrolet Citation, a car that quickly became known for its problems. Owners complained about poor build quality, constant breakdowns, and the fact that you spent more time dealing with the car than actually driving it. In the end, Even a still powerful corporation like GM had to swallow its pride and turn to those same Japanese manufacturers for help, to Toyota. This situation was neither accidental nor a matter of luck. It all came down to how Toyota operated. At the core was the philosophy of Kaizen, continuous daily improvement of every process, from production to management. Put simply, its idea is straightforward. 100 small improvements create more impact than one brilliant breakthrough. In practice, it worked like this. Workers were actively involved in the process and contributed their own ideas for improvement. Processes were constantly reviewed, and mistakes were not ignored but addressed. And most importantly, this was not a one-time effort. Improvement never stopped. This had a direct impact on quality. At Toyota, it was not just high, it was consistent. And that's the key point, because for American manufacturers, the situation was different. You can see it clearly with cars like the Vega, or especially the Citation. One car could be assembled properly, while another came with a long list of issues, simply because the system did not produce consistent results. And this is where GM's leadership reached an important conclusion. Instead of trying once again to develop their own compact car from scratch and risk another failure, they chose a different approach: to adopt the very system that was already working for the Japanese. Meanwhile, in 1981, during the second wave of the fuel crisis, the share of Japanese cars in the US market had already reached an astonishing 25%. For Detroit, this meant the market was slipping away. In the end, the pressure became too strong. American automakers and labor unions began demanding urgent measures from the government to protect the domestic market. And those measures followed. In 1981, an agreement on voluntary export restraints was reached between the US government and Japan's Ministry of International Trade and Industry. Japanese manufacturers agreed to limit exports to no more than 1,680,000 cars per year. Formally, it was a voluntary decision, but in reality, it was a compromise, one the Japanese accepted to avoid open conflict and to keep access to a critical market. From this situation, the Japanese drew two very important conclusions. First, if you cannot sell more, you have to sell at a higher price. This is where their move into the higher-end segment began, and without this agreement, something like Lexus likely would not have appeared. Second, they needed their own factories in the United States. Cars produced locally were not subject to these limits. And here, it was not Toyota but Honda that moved first. In 1982, it opened a plant in Ohio with a capacity of 250,000 cars per year, and all of them bypassed the restrictions. At that moment, Toyota found itself in an unfamiliar role, playing catch-up. And this is where the interests of the two companies finally aligned. GM needed technology and quality. Toyota needed a manufacturing base in the United States. On February 14, 1983, General Motors CEO Roger Smith and Toyota executives Shoichiro Toyota and Eiji Toyota announced plans to establish a joint venture at a recently closed GM plant in Fremont, California. And the choice of this particular plant was more than telling. Fremont was considered the worst plant in the entire GM system. Discipline issues, constant conflicts with workers, and poor build quality were the norm. Cars were coming off the line in such rough condition that dealers sometimes refused to accept them. In the end, it all led to strikes and the plant's closure in 1982. Now, in its place, a joint American-Japanese company was created under the name NUMMI. And by 1984, production began there with a single model, the Toyota Corolla, or rather, almost a single model. Half of the cars were sold as Corolla, while the other half were essentially the same Corolla, but with Chevrolet badges and the name Nova. On paper, it looked like a perfect partnership. Toyota gained production in the United States without major upfront investment, tested its Kaizen system outside Japan, and bought time to build its own plant, which would open toward the end of the 1980s. GM, in turn, got a chance to study the Japanese approach to production and management firsthand, something it had been lacking. And it all looked as if both sides were getting exactly what they wanted. For Toyota, everything was largely going according to plan. Corolla sales remained steady at around 200 to 300,000 units per year. Meanwhile, The Chevrolet version coming off the same assembly line was selling in volumes roughly 3 times lower. The reason was obvious. By that point, Toyota had already built a reputation for reliability and solid build quality, while Chevrolet carried almost the opposite image. But even that wasn't the main point. What's more telling is that GM fully understood this. According to a marketing study conducted in 1987, nearly a third of new car buyers in the United States did not even visit Chevrolet dealerships. And more importantly, they had no intention of doing so. At the same time, a significant portion of these buyers were choosing compact cars, the very segment where Chevrolet had repeatedly disappointed its customers. In the end, the conclusion became clear. In 1988, just 3 years after production began, the Nova was discontinued. Selling the same car under different brands simply did not work. But almost immediately, GM arrived at another idea, this time a genuinely strong one. Not just to sell Japanese cars under its own name, but to create a separate brand that would not carry the same baggage of problems and reputation. And the idea itself was solid. Unfortunately, the execution was a different story. Back in 1971, GM acquired 34% of the Japanese company Isuzu, and later increased its stake to nearly half. Then, in 1981, it also entered Suzuki, starting with 5%, which eventually grew to 35%. By various estimates, GM spent around $1 billion on all of this, and in return gained access not only to Toyota-based models, but also to models from Isuzu and Suzuki. Out of this mix, the Geo brand was created, a project that can, without much hesitation, be called one of the strangest and least successful in GM's history. In 1989, Geo entered the market with 4 models at once. The Chevrolet Nova, produced in Fremont, was simply renamed Geo Prism and remained essentially the same next-generation Toyota Corolla. The Suzuki Swift became the Geo Metro, the compact SUV Suzuki Vitara, also known as the Sidekick, turned into the Geo Tracker, and the Isuzu Impulse Coupe was rebadged as the Geo Storm. On paper, it looked almost perfect. A sedan, a hatchback, a coupe, a convertible, and an SUV, all key segments covered. The cars matched their Japanese counterparts in quality, and the equipment levels were competitive. It seemed like failure in this configuration was almost impossible, but it happened. The issue was that, most likely, GM's leadership, either at the level of individual executives or collectively, decided to sell the Geo brand through Chevrolet's dealer network. And the problem is that the situation from 1987 had barely changed by that point. As a reminder, research at the time showed that about a third of American car buyers did not consider Chevrolet dealerships at all when shopping for a new car. Moreover, by then, buyers had effectively split into 2 groups. One group remained loyal to the traditional American approach. They were openly irritated by Japanese imports and had no interest in considering those cars. The other group, generally younger buyers, had little interest in large and fuel-hungry American full-size models. Instead, they were drawn to Japanese and European cars. As a result, a paradox emerged. One group of buyers deliberately went to Chevrolet dealerships specifically for a real American car and simply ignored the small Geo models sitting in the same showroom. The other group, on the contrary, deliberately avoided Chevrolet showrooms altogether because they had no interest in anything being sold there. On top of that, for reasons that are still hard to explain, in that same year, 1989, when Geo launched, GM also introduced the Chevrolet Tracker. It wasn't just similar, it was essentially the same vehicle as the Geo Tracker. Even the Chevrolet badge was not in its usual form, but literally placed over the Geo emblem. What exactly this was meant to achieve is difficult to say, especially since there's not much reliable information about the Geo brand itself. But just imagine how chaotic the situation looked. Chevrolet dealerships were simultaneously selling both the Chevrolet Tracker and the Geo Tracker, turning the job of dealers into a constant struggle. And on top of that, many customers who came in looking for a real American car had to be told what the Chevrolet Tracker even was. Then those same customers had to be given a clear explanation of how the Geo Tracker was different, even though it was essentially the same vehicle under a different name. Of course, it would be wrong to say that Geo did not sell at all. GM spent enormous amounts on advertising and promoting the brand, and that did have some effect. The launch was fairly strong, but compared to something like the Toyota Corolla, sales were still more than 2 times lower. If you look at the numbers from another angle, the dealer network included around 4,000 dealerships across the country, and on average, each dealer sold about 40 Geo cars per year. For comparison, those same dealers were selling roughly the same number of Chevrolet vehicles, but in a single month. In the end, the Geo story came to a close in the summer of 1997. It ended without much recognition and with significant losses for GM. Today, even in the United States, the brand is remembered mostly by enthusiasts, and outside the US, the number of people who know about it is probably very small. And maybe after this video, there will be a few more.